Hello everybody, welcome back to ComedIan MTG. My name is Ian. Yesterday was the top 4 of the Tier1Con webcam competition for cEDH Part 2. This February edition of the Tier1Con cEDH webcam tournament was a really interesting competition, and we're going to break down the top 4 of that event for you today. The first list up today is the Gitrog Monster, piloted by Spleenface. Now you may recognize Spleenface as our champion from the last Tier1Con. You see, last time Spleenface was playing Razakats, a interactive Tymna Thrasios list based on reanimating Razaketh. This time Spleenface brought the Gitrog Monster. Now ironically, Spleen went to Twitter and asked the people on Twitter what he should bring for this tournament, and they decided on the Gitrog Monster. It looked like Paco was going to be the winner for quite some time, but the Gitrog server kind of rallied and made him play Gitrog Monster. Now, for those of you familiar with the Gitrog Monster, there's not going to be a lot of new, exciting things to see here. It is a pretty classic Gitrog list. Now, to note, Gitrog has actually gotten a lot of reasonable tools lately due to some printings from Commander Legends. For example, they got access to Opposition Agent, which was a huge get for the Gitrog Monster, and I did play Spleen in the Swiss, and Opposition Agent coming down turn 1 was definitely the reason he took that game. Some other tech added pretty recently is the addition of Jeweled Lotus, which is fantastic for these commander reliant decks. Now everyone knows that the Gitrog Monster is an extremely resilient list, and having yet another avenue to get it down super early in the game is obviously a giant boon for this deck. So Gitrog doing very good things, and with a few added pieces from the most recent printings, looking to do well in this tournament, and putting Spleenface in the top 4. Also in the top 4 was Raikkoon with his deck Tier 1-2. Now this deck is an Ikra Kraum partner deck playing Sans White. Now, unlike most Ikra Kraum lists, this is actually not a turbo ad nauseam, and if we scroll down here on the instance, you can actually see there is not an ad nauseam in this list. But some of the instants you may see might be a little more indicative of what it's actually trying to do. It is more of a mid-range list, playing a number of board wipes to be able to control the board and gain a bunch of values with Ikra and Kraum in the command zone. Now, the deck, one of its main focuses is to get onto the board a Niv Mizzet Perrin. Now, if you pay attention to the commanders of this deck, Ikra and Kraum, they are both 5 converted mana cost. So the central idea behind this deck when I talk to Raikkoon is the idea that you can Neoform or Eldritch Evolution either of your commanders into a Niv Mizzet. And if you're familiar with the metagame right now, it is extremely heavy on Storm and interactive instant-filled decks. For example, Underworld Breach or Ad Nauseam focused decks use a bunch of instant and sorcery spells. So in that scenario, I can imagine Niv Mizzet being a giant house. And clearly it was, because it brought Raikkoon to the top 4. Looking towards the win conditions of this list, it is basically a consultation mid-range win condition loops, but also they are playing Underworld Breach and Brain Freeze to be able to win through those avenues. But as I said, a lot of the deck focuses on giving a Niv Mizzet out extremely early in the game and being able to leverage advantage of having one of them there. One really interesting piece of interaction here is the addition of Hydroblast. Now, Hydroblast is a really unique piece because it actually only counters red spells. Now, some Orvar lists, I know we're testing this card out because it can target any permanent, but there's been a lot of discussion recently about Hydroblast as an inclusion due to the prevalence of cards like Dockside, Extortionist, and Underworld Breach. And if these cards are so rampant in the meta and things like Kraum as well, then it might make sense for Hydroblast to be an include. Now, I'm not sure that I personally would sleeve it up at this time, but it is interesting to see, and we'll see going in the future whether it becomes more of a staple. Our third list of the top 4 is Temur Poly Tyrant. Now, the commanders here are Rograk and Thrasios, and it is a polymorph deck. Ifond is a friend of mine and someone I got to play a lot of Magic with at the start of quarantine, and I'm very excited to see him do well with this deck. I was talking to him between rounds and before the semifinals and the finals, and just talking about this list got me so excited. It is an extremely interactive list, having a bunch of instant speed interaction and a bunch of avenues to victory. Now, Underworld Breach and Brain Freeze are definitely ways that Ifan can get to the win conditions of this deck, but in talking with him, the combination of explosivity from having Rograk in the command zone, and combined with the fact that there are many different ways to get a Tidespout Tyrant onto the board, means that it's an extremely explosive deck. Now, to anyone not familiar with Tidespout Tyrant win con, basically if you have Tidespout Tyrant and anything like a Mox Opal or any mana rock that is able to generate more mana than it costs, so a Mox Opal, a Mox Amber, a Soul Ring, a Mana Crypt, any of those, you'll be able to generate infinite mana. And with Tidespout Tyrant, you can also bounce any problematic stacks or permanents that might be getting in the way. So with Rograk being a 0-drop, it really helps to accelerate some of those loops out. There is a ton of redundancy in the polymorph effect. There's Transmogrify, Reality Scramble, Polymorph, Divergent Transformations, Proteus Staff, and even vintage staple Oath of Druids, which is absolutely a ridiculous amount of similarity. Now, obviously, not being able to play a creature other than Tidespout Tyrant in the 99 is definitely a restriction that this deck has to live with, but it grants you access to, once again, these layered redundant win cons, and being able to access your win cons so easily in a deck that doesn't have access to black definitely lines it up for success. When talking with Efond, he mentioned that he has almost 60 games on this deck right now and that it has just been performing extremely well. So I'm excited to see if this list picks up and continues into the future. And finally, our winner for today's tournament, Carbagas with Yidris Storm. Now, for those who know Yidris, it is a very classic ad nauseum deck. Yidris was really storm focused even before ad nause became sort of the prevalent archetype in the meta, and then with the layering of the ad nauseum win cons in this deck, it becomes very strong. It also has able to Underworld Breach and Brain Freeze as classic win conditions. Song of Creation is an amazing storm outlet. Actually, you're going to see some content pretty soon where I'm playing a deck with this card in it, but when Song of Creation is able to resolve, that card is absolutely busted, and being able to see it go off is insane. Apart from that, Yidris is pretty straightforward. It is very aggressive, very storm heavy, and plays a lot of cards that accelerate you to a very quick win. Now, going for the Pier, going for ad nause, and apart from that, it is just a very aggressive deck looking to push out a win as quickly as possible. Now, Carbagas did equate a number of his successes today to the use of Waste Not. Waste Not is a very powerful card in Storm engines, especially when you're using a lot of wheel effects. If you can catch your opponents after using a wheel when you have a Waste Not on the board, it's quite similar to that of a Hull Breacher or a Notion Thief, where you can really just leverage these wheels to be absolute houses on your side of the battlefield. I used this tech a lot when I was playing Croxa, and I'm really excited to see it played in a deck with more colors, because I really do think the explosive nature of this card can really leverage a lot of victories. One thing to note about the winner of today and last Tier1Con champion is that when Spleenface went on his undefeated streak, he went completely undefeated in the Swiss, was able to skip the semifinals because he took the first seat, and then completely won the finals. Carbagas did the same thing today. Completely won the Swiss, did not drop a match, then was able to skip the semifinals because taking the first place seat, and won the full tournament. Clearly showing that those who are able to destroy the Swiss of these tournaments are clearly able to clinch the victory when it is important to them. So really amazing seeing two players going on a completely undefeated streak for these tournaments. This was a very impressive showing from Carbagas, and clearly a demonstration of a lot of skill when it comes to competitive EDH. So that wraps up my tournament report for Tier1Con. While you're here on YouTube, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you like videos like this, and if you're feeling extra generous and want to support more content like this, please check out patreon.com/ComedIanMTG. It helps out the channel so much, helps pay for things like the brand new computer I'm using to edit this. Also, I want to hear from you. Tell me what decks you think should be placing at the top of these tournaments. Have you seen something in your local meta, or maybe you're playing somewhere like the cEDH Nexus, the Play EDH, or on the Cockatrice servers. If you're playing in any of these places and you're seeing some decks really perform, but you haven't seen them show a lot of tournament success, I'd love to hear about it down in the comments down below in this video. Tell me all about these lists. I'm always excited to find out about new exciting decks, or just decks that you think are completely dominant. Also, if you have any ideas of decks that you would like me to play in the next Tier1Con, I was able to play in this tournament, although it was not my day, so I'll be maybe posting some other stuff about my own personal performance in here a little bit later. But if you want to see me play a certain list going into these tournaments, I'd love to hear about that in the comments down below. Alright everybody, thank you for joining me for this top 4 breakdown. Have an amazing week. Peace.